taking Alberta to court?
No. Premier Smith said herself yesterday that the Sovereignty Act is a largely symbolic gesture. You don't take someone to court for something that's symbolic. On n'ira pas devant les tribunaux pour ce que l'Alberta a adopté hier. C'est une mesure symbolique. La première ministre Smith l'a admise elle-même. On ne va pas devant les tribunaux pour une mesure, pour débattre d'une mesure symbolique.
You've got provincial and federal conservatives really hammering you on the carbon tax. What makes you think that this can survive?
It's carbon pricing, as the Supreme Court has said in its ruling 2 years ago. And we've fought 2 federal elections where carbon pricing was one of the issues, not the only one. I'll be happy to fight a third one if we have to.
Le sultan qui organise la COP28 en profite pour essayer d'avoir des deals sur l'exploitation du pétrole avec le Canada notamment.
Moi, ce que je peux vous dire, c'est que j'ai eu de nombreuses rencontres avec le président de la COP28, 4 ou 5 depuis le printemps dernier, et nous n'avons discuté que des négociations internationales sur les changements climatiques.
Mais est-ce que vous pensez qu'ils utilisent l'organisation de la COP justement pour essayer de développer l'industrie pétrolière? Ce
que je vous dis, c'est que moi, lorsque je l'ai rencontré, je n'ai eu que des conversations qui portent sur les négociations internationales sur les changements climatiques.
Qu'est-ce que vous allez faire?
Asking the Senate to pass Bill C-234, saying that the unelected Senate, their words, should pass a bill that the House of Commons supported. What do you say in response to that?
I have a lot of things to say about that, actually. The Conservative Party didn't feel that the Senate was so unelected when they tried to block the adoption of C-69 on impact assessment in 2019. And it's somewhat ironic that they're telling us to let the Senate do their work, yet they're trying to adopt a motion that would pressure the Senate to do what they want. And in fact, Andrew Scheer has posted online pictures of some senators as if they were wanted criminals, and there are police inquiries now because of that. They face threats. I mean, it's unbelievable that they seem to stop at nothing to try and get what they want, including bullying senators, independent senators. I've had conversations with senators. There's a world of difference between having a conversation with someone and talking and bullying them to try and get them to do what you want, to force them to do what you want under threat. There's a world of difference.
Quel serait l'impact si le Sénat adopte ce projet de loi 234 qui a été adopté par la Chambre? Ça serait quoi l'impact pour vous? Est-ce que vous vous sentiriez lié par ça? Seriez-vous obligé d'y donner suite?
On verra. Ça me fera plaisir de vous en reparler, mais c'est très hypothétique à ce point-ci.
Mais pourquoi c'est très hypothétique? Ça se peut très bien que ce soit adopté quand même.
On ne connaît pas le résultat du vote encore. Alors, c'est hypothétique dans la mesure où on ne connaît pas le résultat du vote.
Le fait que les conservateurs amènent la taxe carbone.
Alors, 800 millions pour la communauté anglophone au Québec sur 5 ans. Est-ce que c'est assez? Trop? C'est quoi le bon chiffre?
Mais commençons avec le fait que notre gouvernement, c'est le premier gouvernement qui a indiqué très clairement que le français est en déclin au Canada. Et ça, c'était un élément très clé dans C13. Et notre responsabilité, qui est une responsabilité constitutionnelle, c'est de protéger les communautés linguistiques en situation minoritaire. Ça inclut les anglophones au Québec et ça inclut les francophones à l'extérieur du Québec, comme moi, franco-albertain. En ce qui concerne les argents sont négociés avec les provinces et c'est une somme qu'on octroie par le procès budgétaire. Et maintenant, nous avons un plan d'action qui est 4,1 milliards sur les prochaines 5 ans, et ça inclut l'argent pour les francophones à l'extérieur du Québec, les anglophones au Québec, et on va travailler avec le gouvernement du Québec pour s'assurer que le français continue à monter. Et en ce qui concerne l'immigration francophone, c'est un composant très important à l'extérieur du Québec aussi.
En finançant les minorités anglophones au Québec, on finance un peu l'anglicisation du Québec parce que, dans le fond, les anglophones font partie de la majorité canadienne. Qu'est-ce que vous répondez à ça?
Regarde, je pense que le Bloc est préoccupé par la montée du Parti québécois au Québec et c'est une chicane que M. Beaulieu est en train de chercher avec nous. Si on regarde les faits, on transfère 700 millions de dollars chaque année au Québec pour l'immigration. Donc, la grande somme de cet argent, c'est pour franciser les gens qui arrivent. Et je transfère l'argent aux anglophones pour le développement de la main-d'œuvre. Pourquoi? Pour les aider à se franciser, pour participer dans le marché du travail au Québec. Le taux de chômage auprès des anglophones est plus élevé que les Québécois francophones. Et donc, les communautés anglophones demandent l'argent pour se franciser, pour participer pleinement dans la société québécoise. Let's talk about the Alberta Sovereignty Act, and we'll go back to questions about official languages after. Like, this is a massive distraction from the real preoccupations of Albertans, which are housing, growing an economy that works for everybody, getting the renewables moratorium reduced, and actually building up an economy that works for everybody. I said this when the Act came out. It's a dubious piece of legislation. This is theater to distract people from what's really going on, which is the fact that Danielle Smith has made some bad calls. She scared away at least $12 billion on renewables already. That could go as high as $30 billion. When I met with her a couple of weeks ago, I said, can this end soon? And she didn't have a clear answer on that. She's actually put in a piece of legislation that would stop regulations that don't plan to go in place until 2035. And there's a working table in place to actually talk about if 2035 is even the right date. So this is political theater. It's a political spat. It's another opportunity for the province to try to pick a fight with the feds that, quite frankly, Albertans don't need. And if the Premier or her ministers want to reach out to the federal government, they can just pick up the phone. They don't have to impose the Sovereignty Act.
La chicane avec l'Alberta?
Moi, quand moi j'avais 12 ans, j'ai vu ce que M. Lockheed a fait avec M. Pierre Elliott Trudeau, et essayer d'avoir une chicane avec le fédéral, c'est toujours un élément que les provinces utilisent pour avancer leur cause. Mais en ce qui concerne l'acte de la souveraineté en Alberta, pour nous, c'est une distraction pure aux mauvaises décisions que Mme Smith a prises. Nous sommes à une table de travail ensemble pour travailler, pour développer les règlements à travers tout le secteur énergétique et d'autres enjeux. Parce que sachez, mes collègues, que comme pays, on ne peut pas arriver à la carboneutralité sans les travailleurs albertains et sans tous les secteurs qui sont très importants et bien ancrés en Alberta. We don't get to net zero without Alberta workers and the oil and gas sector, and so the Sovereignty Act is a big distraction.
Est-ce que ça va être l'agence de l'accent sur les langues officielles pour le Québec qui va aller à la francisation, comme l'espère M. Roberge?
Mais en ce qui concerne tout le gouvernement, on donne l'argent déjà pour franciser les gens. Et si M. Roberge va s'asseoir pour savoir comment on peut travailler ensemble, j'aimerais bien ça. Moi, je vais travailler avec M. Girard pour faire certain qu'il va prendre l'argent qui est dédié aux anglophones et on va travailler ensemble pour s'assurer qu'on continue à monter le français au Canada et que les anglophones sont protégés au Québec et que les francophones à l'extérieur du Québec reçoivent leur part aussi. Mais c'est pas dans le plan d'action et on s'est dit comme gouvernement, il faut travailler des moyens. Donc, c'est une conversation que je continue à avoir avec le ministre Roberge.
Les conservateurs qui ramènent la taxe carbone encore avec l'accord Ukraine-Canada, vous en pensez quoi?
C'est farfelu, c'est une partie en crise. Ils n'auraient jamais dû abandonner les Ukrainiens ici au Canada, ni en Ukraine. Ils se battent pour leur démocratie et la nôtre. Et le fait que Pierre Poilievre a décidé d'abandonner les Ukrainiens pour aller chercher des votes des Russes ou avoir plus de support à l'étranger, c'est inacceptable. Merci.
Union says it can lose $300 million in wages if 900 temporary foreign workers come in. What's your response to that?
I met with Sean this morning from Building Trades with Minister Miller, and what needs to happen in Minister Champagne, and we are working on this, Stellantis, LG, NextStar needs to sit down with the unions and us so we can clear the air. What is clear is there are going to be 2,500 really good paying long-term jobs to operate the plant. The question is, how many good paying Canadian jobs are going to be used to build that plant? How many technical experts do we need from Korea to come and help do the original equipment manufacturing setup? I want the number of Canadian jobs to be as high as possible, and we need all the parties at the table to clear the air. Merci tout le monde.
Premier Smith wants to create a crown corporation.
Hey, look, I said that the Sovereignty Act is like the play with the play. It's like I can't write this script, you guys. We're talking about a conservative premier that wants to nationalize the energy industry in Alberta. Do I need to say anything else? Like, you can't write that stuff. We have the only private sector electricity market in the country. It's good for Albertans, it's good for consumers, it's good for industry, and now she wants to renationalize it. Why? To pick a fight with the feds over regs that don't even yet exist. I can't even write this stuff. It's crazy. Mais regarde, la question que Mme Smith, première ministre conservatrice de l'Alberta, veut nationaliser le secteur électrique, qui est le seul secteur électrique privé au pays, ça dépasse la norme. Moi, je ne peux pas même écrire un texte pour une pièce de théâtre qui serait aussi farfelue que la décision, pas de la décision, mais l'idée qu'elle a lancée aux Albertains, aux Canadiens.
Canadian jobs need more protection in deals like with Stellantis because last week it was just going to be a few temporary workers. You were even saying only one's been approved, but now it seems like the government is more concerned about the amount coming in. Do you need more protection?
So this week we can get into a few more of the details. Okay, so labor market impact assessments are what companies use to be able to bring in a temporary foreign worker. In my ministry right now, there's one of those that has been approved. The International Mobility Program that exists in immigration is what we use to make sure that people from all kinds of countries can come in and help do the technical setup. In the same way, like I was meeting with a company called Ever Technologies. We gave them $75 million out of the Canada Growth Fund a few weeks back. They are doing geothermal drilling in Germany to provide long-term sustainable, low-cost, net zero heat. But they don't have enough people that have done that kind of geothermal drilling in Germany, so Canadian engineers and geophysicists and geothermal experts are in Germany right now building that plant. We have to play our cards right so that Canadian experts can go and help our plant set up overseas, and that we owe that to our partners when they're coming up to do that technical setup here. So what we don't have from NextStar, Stellantis, and LG is how many technical supervisors need to come here to train good union-paying jobs owned by Canadians to do that work, and we're going to get to the bottom of it. Merci tout le monde.
Minister, can you stop on barbecue? We want to ask you, what is the latest on negotiations right now? Are you going to be able to pass this by the end of the year?
Look, the conversations are ongoing. I think they've been positive and constructive, as I said earlier. It's still our intention to try to find a way to work together. We still have a number of weeks before the end of the year. So we continue, in my view, to work towards that as our objective.
How confident are you that you can table this bill by the end of the year?
Well, I said it, the conversations have been positive, but are not concluded. So it's difficult for me to speculate on that. But you just take it one day at a time, one conversation at a time.
And are you afraid? I mean, if you're not tabling it by the end of the year, are you afraid that your deal will end up being
Well, no. I've said from the beginning on this that what matters is to get it right and to make sure that we get the action that we take in this space to be appropriate, both with respect to our fiscal constraints and in terms of need. People are expecting action in this space, and we want to make sure that we demonstrate our commitment, but we also need to respect the fiscal constraints that we're under right now. So that's a difficult balance, and my focus is on getting that right. The politics of it, well, that will follow after the decisions that get made. But right now, we're having positive and constructive conversations, so there's no reason for me to engage even in my own mind in hypotheticals about what might happen if that doesn't work out.
Have you violated the deal? You're not going to be able to pass this by the end of the year.
Well, look, the supply and confidence agreement laid out the terms by which two parties that are very different parties can work together.
2023 passing it.
No, for sure. But the spirit of that agreement was that we would find agreement on these things, and it lays out a framework for us to work together. And obviously, events occur. Negotiations end up being more or less complicated than expected. And when I was in House Leader, you have to move with those things. I don't think that if you allow yourself to be locked in by the rigidity of those words instead of the spirit with which they represent, then I think you miss the point. The idea was to find common ground, to find a way for Parliament to be stable and to function. And the Supply and Confidence Agreement always had built into it room to disagree and an acknowledgement that we're two different parties that are going to be dealing with real-world circumstances, of which there have been a lot.
With the fiscal restraints you're facing, what elements of the pharmacare can you actually commit to, and which ones do you think you can let slide?
Well, that's precisely the discussion that we're having, and the conversation around what is the art of the possible here. And as I say, the conversations that I've been having with the New Democrats have been constructive. I think that we've been able to see and understand each other and the circumstance that we're in, and that we're having conversations that are productive. But I'm not at a point at this time where I could reveal our or their position, because that's in motion and changing minute by minute.
It's still not clear to me.
Is the end of the year deadline helpful, or is it more of a hindrance in terms of the discussion and getting it right?
Well, I think it's helpful. hopeful. I think that we're trying to get this done as quickly as possible. I think it sets out a guideline that I'd like to be able to meet and that we're working towards. But it is important that we work quickly. I mean, when these conversations are as difficult and as challenging as they are, it is easy for time to pass by and for conversations to take more time. So having a sense of urgency to that is important. We recognize that in a minority government, things move very quickly, and you have to move at that cadence as well.
Is Big Pharma screwing this up?
Avec les libéraux, avec les néo-démocrates.
Oui, c'est une entente qui est flexible et c'est vraiment l'esprit qui est tellement important et c'est tellement important aussi de s'assurer qu'éventuellement les résultats est là et que les résultats est bon pour les Canadiens et les Canadiennes. Et ça, c'est l'intention de tendre, mais ce n'est pas la lettre ou exactement les mots dans les tentes, mais vraiment l'esprit. Et chaque jour, comme le leader du gouvernement ou maintenant comme le ministre de la Santé, c'est ma responsabilité de trouver un équilibre entre les deux priorités pour les deux parties.
It's still not clear to me under what assumptions you're working right now. I mean, if the bill is not tabled by the end of the year, are you under the assumption that the deal with the NDP would just collapse?
Well, again, on a supply and confidence agreement, it recognizes that there's a lot of things on which we will disagree. There's a lot of things that will move and change.
Even that?
Well, I think that when you agree, when two parties agree on something, then it changes the context of the deal. And I understand why people's minds are being cast, into the future. I too can be prone to engaging in speculation and trying to be clairvoyant about what might happen. But we live in a world where 1 week is an eternity in politics. And the conversations that we're having right now are fruitful and positive. My mind isn't on these hypotheticals. I understand why other people's minds are on these hypotheticals. My mind is very much on the conversations that we're having now and making as much progress as quickly as we can. If we arrive in some other state, then we'll have a conversation. But right now, I'm not fixated.
Have you made any requests for more time?
No, I haven't. I think that right now I'm operating on the presumption that we can work together and we can use the time that we have intelligently to find a solution. And we do have some time here. And if we're in another circumstance, then we'll evaluate that at a different time. But that's not where my mind is right now.
The NDP says you're beholden to Big Pharma. That's what's really keeping this up.
I mean, look, I think we have to stop the hyperbolic nonsense. The question here is how do we deal with the fiscal circumstance that we're in, which is real and serious, and the world is watching. How Canada is comporting itself. We have the most enviable debt position among our G7 countries, both in terms of debt and deficit. We have a AAA credit rating. Canadians expect us to maintain those things. And it's easy in opposition just to wave it away as if those things aren't important, but they are.
But you are
and
facing a lot of pressure from Big Pharma. Are you standing up to them?
Well, look, my objective is to make sure that the system that we move to, the system that we are building a foundation for, is the one that best serves Canadians. And that means that both their health and their finances. And we have to balance both of those things. And I would say that it's easy to throw. I've never.
The interest of Big Pharma.
But I will not. I will not. It's very easy to do this, and I think it's dangerous. That if you question or impugn somebody's motives, you better do it with a heck of a lot more evidence than they're presenting. And so for me, when I'm criticizing somebody, I agree. You may come to. In life, there's a certain amount of data, and once that data is you reach the end of it, you have to look into the future, which is unknowable, and make your best guess based on data. And I believe earnestly that the NDP is doing that with the best of intention of Canadians in their heart, and I certainly am doing it with me in my heart. But to cast aspersions or to doubt the motivations of another person who's trying to do their best is precisely what can be broken about our political system. It's a difficult thing to stand up and put your hand up and say, I want to take responsibility. Times are tough. I want to find solutions. We have to be kind to people who do that. And trying to cast aspersions onto their motive as if they somehow care less about the health of Canadians, they somehow care less about somebody who doesn't have coverage, is just disingenuous, and it plays games with something that's very serious.
Les conservateurs, avec leur opposition à la taxe carbone qui se poursuit, est-ce que je vais vous entendre là-dessus avec le Canada, l'accord Canada-Ukraine. Est-ce qu'il est temps qu'il commence à parler d'autre chose? Est-ce qu'il s'entête trop, selon vous, à ramener toujours cette excuse-là?
C'est pour moi, c'est tout le temps, c'est important d'expliquer pourquoi. C'est pourquoi une partie comme le Parti conservateur prendre une décision comme de vote contre une attente pour les échanges libres avec l'Ukraine. Et pour moi, c'est simplement une question pourquoi. Et c'est évident que ce n'est pas une question de le prix pour les carbone ou le prix pour les pollutions, mais il y a une autre explanation et c'est pour M. Poilievre d'expliquer ça.
Can we talk about the influence of the industry? We've seen resignations from medicine regulators with Health Canada, with pesticide regulators. Like, I don't think it's out of the realm of a possibility to raise these questions about whether industry has captured Health Canada and is influencing the negotiations on this.
Oh no! You or anybody else.
That's a legitimate line of question.
You or anybody else are free to question my integrity or question the integrity of Health Canada. That is absolutely within your purview or the purview of any political actor. I would just say
and
that
there's a track record to do that as well.
In your opinion. Or in the opinion of...
There were resignations
from
people.
Look, Health Canada has 12,000 employees, 12,000 different opinions. And I'm sure that in any group of 12,000 people, you can find a diversity of opinion. And I'm sure you could ascribe motive to that diversity of opinion. Or you could suggest, and this is what I would suggest, that we are in a world of mostly good people trying to do the right thing. And that too often we impugn people with ill motive when no ill motive exists. They just simply come to facts in a different way. And there are very much bad people in the world. There are very much bad people who have ill intent in their heart. But I can tell you that in the vast preponderance of the 12,000 people that are in Health Canada, what I see every single day when I walk into that office is people who are dedicated to public service, people who are dedicated to doing the right thing. Now, they may look at information and come to a different conclusion than you or maybe even me, but that's not because they're a bad person or because they don't want the best outcome. And I think we have to be very, very careful when we're talking about the motives of other people. It's very easy to ascribe ill motive. And in the shadows of that, in the debate about whether or not a good person using facts and data comes to a different conclusion, in the shadow of impugning somebody's motive in that way, hides real darkness, the kind of darkness that we should be focusing on, the kind of darkness that we should fear, the kind of darkness we should ask questions about. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Minister.
Minister Gould, whenever we get some pharmacare legislation tabled and passed, are you still hoping to have this done by the end of the year?
Well, we're working with the NDP on this, but I'm quite confident that we'll land it.
I mean, it's impossible at this point, right? Like, you cannot get this passed by the end of this year. Like, can you be honest with Canadians and tell us?
Well, yeah, I don't think we're going to get it passed by the end of this year, but we'll definitely keep working, and those conversations are productive, and it's part of the SACA agreement, and those conversations are positive, they're ongoing, and so I have confidence that we'll get to where we need to be.
Of the deal?
Those conversations are ongoing, and I know that Minister Holland and the NDP are having very productive conversations.
Est-ce que vous pensez qu'il faut changer le code criminel pour retirer l'exemption religieuse au discours haineux?
Je crois que nous avons déjà des lois extrêmement fortes quand ça veut dire avec la haine dans ce pays. Et c'est clair qu'il n'y a pas d'excuse, qu'il n'y a pas un moment pour être haineux au Canada.
Yesterday suggested a shooting in Winnipeg had something to do with Pierre Poilievre's attitude of burn everything down. He tweeted about that. Is that an appropriate thing for a Liberal MP to be equating a violent shooting?
It's not.
Are you going to talk to Mr. Hardy about this?
Yes, yeah, but it is absolutely inappropriate, and that's not something that anyone should be suggesting from any political party.
So what are you going to say to him when you speak to him?
Just what I told you.
So.
Le gouvernement fédéral donne trop d'argent aux anglophones du Québec, les groupes d'intérêt anglophones notamment.
Ce que le Bloc nous dit, c'est qu'il y a des fonds pour la communauté anglophone, pour les groupes anglophones. Donc, il y a peur qu'on anglicise les Anglais, essentiellement.
Mais est-ce que cet argent-là devrait servir, comme le Bloc dit, quasiment à une proportion plus élevée à la francisation de la communauté anglophone?
Mais il y a 700 millions par année qui vont au niveau de la francisation, année après année. 1 milliard par année, c'est 1 milliard par année. 1 milliard par année, c'est 1 milliard par année. 1 milliard par année, c'est 1 milliard par année. 1 milliard par année, c'est 1 milliard par année. 1 milliard par année, c'est 1 milliard par année. 1 milliard par année, c'est 1 milliard par année. 1 milliard par année, c'est 1 milliard par année. 1 milliard par année, c'est 1 milliard par année. 1 milliard par année, c'est 1 milliard par année. 1 milliard par année, c'est 1 milliard par année. 1 milliard par année, c'est 1 milliard par année. 1 milliard par année, c'est 1 milliard par année. 1 milliard par année, c'est 1 milliard par année. 1 milliard par année, c'est 1 milliard par année. 1 milliard par année, c'est 1 milliard par année. 1 milliard par année, c'est 1 milliard par année. 1 milliard par année, c'est 1 milliard par année. 1 milliard par année, c'est 1 milliard par année. 1 Il y a un plan de langue officielle qui donne des sommes records pour le français partout. On a reconnu pour une première fois qu'il fallait faire plus au Québec, donc on fait plus au niveau de la langue de travail, on fait plus au niveau de la langue de service. Il y a des services qui sont requis par la communauté anglophone. Et moi, ce que je dis au Bloc, c'est arrêtez de diviser les Québécois. Moi, je trouve ça sérieux, là. N'importe quel politicien qui soit au gouvernement, dans l'opposition, a comme rôle d'unir une population, ou du moins ne pas la diviser. Et le Bloc échoue lamentablement sur cet aspect.
Est-ce que vous seriez d'accord qu'une large portion du plan d'action sur les langues officielles serve à la francisation?
Mais la très vaste majorité du plan sur les langues officielles sert aux Français et on a 700 millions pour la francisation. Ce que je dis au Bloc québécois, c'est que chaque matin, tous les Québécois, on doit se lever et défendre et promouvoir le français. Mais ce n'est pas nécessaire de viser et à s'attaquer à la communauté anglophone. Il y a un problème fondamental là-dessus. Fondamental.
800 millions, est-ce que c'est trop sur 5 ans?
The aircraft that the government is looking at sole sourcing, has Cabinet approved that decision?
From what I understand, there's no decision made.
Do you support sole sourcing it rather than Bombardier wants it?
We'll see what decision we make afterward.
But what do you think of the idea of not opening up the
Sur
competition to
C-57, est-ce que les conservateurs s'entêtent avec leur position anti-carbone, anti-taxe carbone?
Mais les conservateurs, je le dis souvent, mais je le pense vraiment, ils veulent nous faire retourner à l'âge de pierre. Je veux dire, ils n'ont pas de plan au niveau de la lutte au changement climatique. C'est plus seulement de les éviter, c'est de vivre avec ces changements climatiques-là. L'impact est énorme. Il faut les mitiguer. Il faut essayer de les renverser aussi autant que possible pour nos enfants et nos petits-enfants. Il y a quelque chose de très irresponsable de ne pas s'attaquer au plan climatique.
Le 800 millions sur 5 ans, à peu près, le 800 millions pour les organismes de la communauté anglophone, vous jugez que c'est le bon chiffre. C'est ça que vous nous dites?
Bien, le chiffre qui est là, c'est le chiffre qui a été bâti sur des recherches, sur des financements traditionnels, sur des pourcentages, etc. Ce que je dis, c'est qu'il y a aussi de besoins au niveau de la communauté anglophone, au niveau des commissions scolaires, au niveau d'accès à la justice, au niveau de l'éducation de façon large, au niveau de l'aspect légal. Donc, il faut chaque jour défendre le français, mais pas pour ça s'attaquer à la communauté anglophone.
Bombardier still wants at last week's meeting.
No decision has been made. We're still consulting and listening to the different perspectives.
Do you support that? Would you be in favor of a sole source contract on that?
I just said that we are still listening carefully to the different points of view, and a decision will be made in due course.
Are you concerned about sole source contracts?
As I said, we are listening to different perspectives, and we'll make a decision in due course. Thank you.
L'hypothèse d'un pont tunnel à Québec, j'en pensais quoi, monsieur? L'hypothèse d'un pont tunnel à Québec, entre Québec et Lévis, j'en pensais quoi?
Bon, écoutez, c'est sorti ce matin, donc j'ai besoin de regarder attentivement ce qui est sorti. De toute évidence, mon attention présentement se focalise davantage sur l'importance d'aller d'avant avec un investissement structurant, transport collectif moderne pour la région de Québec. Ce qu'on entend, c'est que les efforts pour un troisième lien prendraient jusqu'à 10 années d'études. Donc, ça prendrait un certain temps. Ce qu'on sait, c'est que l'investir pour un transport collectif moderne pour la région de Québec doit se faire rapidement. Et c'est là-dessus qu'on consacre nos efforts.
Mais traditionnellement, vous n'êtes pas très ouvert à ça, par contre, pour les voitures. Un troisième lien pour les voitures, vous, ça...
Bien, ce sont des études qui sortent. 2, c'est un projet du gouvernement du Québec. Et 3, bien, à nouveau, notre investissement immédiat, c'est pour un transport collectif moderne pour la région de Québec.
Va-t-on s'attaquer davantage aux discours haineux et antisémites comme le propose le Bloc québécois? Ils vont déposer un projet de loi tantôt.
Bien, écoutez, on voit ce qui se passe sur les médias sociaux, dans les conversations. Il y a beaucoup de tensions, parfois de la haine, parfois des incitations à la violence. Et c'est pour ça qu'il faut continuer d'envisager toutes les méthodes et toutes les mesures possibles pour protéger les gens dans un contexte de polarisation, de désinformation de plus en plus accrue et de plus en plus problématique.
Y compris de renforcer le code criminel.
Le ministre de la Justice s'est déjà prononcé là-dessus. On a fait beaucoup au cours des dernières années pour donner au gouvernement et tous les gouvernements, y compris les services policiers les outils dont ils ont besoin pour lutter contre la désinformation, la polarisation, la haine et la violence.
Et abolir l'exemption religieuse pour les discours haineux, vous voyez ça de... Est-ce que vous voyez
Mon collègue, M. Virani, s'est déjà prononcé là-dessus, puis je vous invite à lui poser des questions sur les aspects plus techniques, mais sur les questions de vision et d'objectifs, je pense qu'on doit être très clair.
The Willings P8s, how close is the government to making a decision? There is a deadline this week for the U.S. pricing. It has to be done this week if the government wants to pay that price. So how close is the decision, and do you support a sole source contract in a case like this where there isn't another model that the government says is readily available right now?
As I've just said to some of your valuable colleagues, we're still listening to different perspectives, we're still discussing the important file, and a decision will be made in due course.
How close is that decision?
The decision will be made in due course, and the importance of making the right decision depends on the care that we put to the different perspectives and viewpoints that are being provided and shared.
One of the viewpoints is that Bombardier wants in. They say they can build this aircraft down the line and that they believe they can create Canadian jobs. Are you still open to the idea of opening this up to what they call a fair and competitive process?
Again, there's a variety of perspectives that have been provided. We're carefully listening to them, and we hope to make a decision in due course.
Les conservateurs qui ramènent la taxe carbone encore avec ces 57, vous en pensez quoi? Est-ce que ça...
Bien, écoutez, sur le prix sur la pollution, c'est une mesure qui non seulement réduit la pollution, mais met plus d'argent dans les poches de 8 familles sur 10. C'est une mesure qui a été célébrée à nouveau la semaine dernière lorsque M. Trudeau a rencontré les responsables de l'Union européenne. C'est une mesure non seulement qui fait une grande différence présentement, mais c'est une mesure d'avenir. La seule manière par laquelle on peut lutter contre la pollution et les changements climatiques, c'est de faire en sorte que les gens reçoivent plus d'argent dans leurs poches et donc puissent joindre les deux bouts plus facilement. C'est exactement ce que la pluie et la pollution fait présentement, et c'est ce qu'on pense devoir faire aussi au cours des prochaines années.
Avec les conservateurs qui ramènent la taxe carbone comme exclu.
Les conservateurs, écoutez, leur politique officielle, c'est de dire que les changements climatiques n'existent pas. 2, par conséquent, ils n'ont pas de plan pour lutter contre la pollution et les changements climatiques. Et 3, ils parlent beaucoup d'abordabilité, mais quand c'est le temps de mettre de l'argent dans les poches des gens de la classe moyenne, plus d'argent, tout en luttant contre la pollution, ils s'y opposent. Et on a vu ce qui s'est passé avec l'Ukraine la semaine dernière. Ils mélangent toutes sortes de choses. Le fait qu'en Europe, y compris en Ukraine, on est en avance. On a un prix sur la pollution qui lutte contre la pollution et qui nous amène vers une société plus prospère et plus propre. Mais ça donne l'impression qu'ils sont dans un autre monde, dans une autre ère. C'est pas comme ça qu'on veut voir le futur du pays. Merci. Merci. Bonne journée.
Are you hoping to see the truce or the temporary stoppage of fighting between Hamas and Israel last longer?
I'm hopeful each day that there's progress being made and getting everyone to the table to make sure that civilians are safe and hostages are returned.
What's can you tell us about the end?
We're working on the details. No, so this is the day. We're still
Do you support that, or would you be in favor of that?
Well, this is to basically ensure that the communities are able to participate in a range of projects that are large and that they are currently unable to do because of limited financial resources. So as we scope out what that looks like, we will be able to give you more details.
So natural gas, you're considering natural gas projects?
Well, I'm not considering it. I think it's on the table. I think there's a range of projects that are going to be discussed, but at this point we don't have a decision on that yet.
Okay. Thanks, Mr.
What's the federal government going to commit when it comes to the landfill search? Will the federal government put money on the table for the actual search itself? We're not talking about feasibility studies. We're not talking about any more investigations into whether it's possible. Will the feds be offering money for the actual search if one actually takes place?
We are in discussions with the province of Manitoba, and as I've said from the beginning, we will be supporting the families throughout the process, and that will include working with the province as well as the other jurisdictions in order to ensure that we support the families in their search.
Are you open to a 50-50 cost share, or would you want the province to pick up more of the price tag?
What do you think of the Parti Québécois doing better in the polls now? Are Quebecers becoming more sovereignist?
Well, no, I think the real survey is going to be at next election, and Quebecers know that the Liberal Party is representing them pretty well. We have a good caucus and lots of ministers in cabinet. j'ai rien à annoncer concernant de l'aide supplémentaire ou quoi que ce soit.
Êtes-vous en mesure de nous dire pourquoi il y a seulement de l'aide dans l'énoncé économique la semaine dernière, seulement de l'aide pour les médias écrits?
On a bonifié tout simplement un programme qui était déjà existant, mais on regarde les autres façons qu'on peut mieux aider l'ensemble des médias.
A 12-year-old died allegedly because of sextortion. What is your reaction to that, and what is the government going to do to crack down on online harm, specifically around sextortion?
Yeah, this is it's a horrible story again about a young person being harassed online. We know that bullying and intimidation online is a real problem in Canada and all over the world. So our government is still committed to bringing forward new legislation to better protect youth and children against online harm.
But you don't have a timeline for when you will bring forward that bill, so why should Canadians take that seriously? You've been promising this since 2019. There's still nothing tabled, no date as to when it is going to be tabled.
This is an important piece of legislation, and it's important that we get it right. So when we're ready to announce, we will.
What are the holdups, though? Is any reaction to the tragic news out of Prince George yesterday with the 12-year-old boy?
Of course, our heart goes out to the family affected. It's always tragic when we lose anyone in this country, let alone a child.
Just with like a child allegedly being sextorted, as what happened in this case, is the government looking at like what they can do for further protections for young children online?
Yeah, obviously our heart goes out to the family, as I said. There's more work to be done, and I'll leave it to my colleague responsible to comment on the specifics. That's a great question. I'm not sure. Thank you.
Can I ask you about the tragic story in British Columbia with a 12-year-old? Is this a sign that we need to do more to protect children online?
The government's view, in my view, is that we always have to continue to do more to protect children online. There was legislation previously introduced in the Senate, I think it was Bill S-12, that took some important steps. My colleague, the Minister of Justice, is looking at some online harms, online safety legislation. I hope and think we'll be in a position to introduce that legislation soon, but this is a tragic reminder that some of the harms done online are very real, and that a 12-year-old boy in British Columbia takes his own life in such a horrible way should remind all of us that the online world can be very dangerous and vulnerable people can be preyed upon. So everything the governments, plural, can do, it's about community groups, it's about provincial and municipal partners, but the Government of Canada should and must do its part, and that's exactly what we're doing.
The online harms bill has been promised for more than 4 years now, so why are we still waiting for it?
Because it's complicated legislation. It's legislating in terms of the internet, as we've seen in previous iterations. It's a complicated space to legislate in and on, but the urgency of moving, I think, is real, and I have every confidence that the Minister of Justice and the government will be in a position to move soon.
Since the audit verdict, sir, have you had reassurances from our Five Eyes allies that they're still willing to share intelligence with us?
My discussions with CSIS and the RCMP after the jury decision with respect to that particular case have been that the system worked. It proved that in the case where somebody does something that investigators and prosecutors determine didn't respect the law, and the jury is given a case and a verdict comes down, it's a proof point that there are laws that govern how this information is treated, and everybody who has access to that information must follow the law. So I have heard nothing from Five Eyes partners. I spoke to Secretary Mayorkas and other colleagues. Nobody has raised this as an issue, and the RCMP and CSIS have confirmed to me that we continue to work very collaboratively with the Five Eyes partners.
And yet the suggestion was that he was on the cusp of handing over this information. So I'd like to know, has the RCMP taken adequate steps to make sure a breach of this magnitude doesn't happen again?
Of course the RCMP review a circumstance like this and ensure that they have all the proper procedures in place. I want to be careful not to comment on a specific case because there's a sentencing hearing, I think, coming up, and there are potential appeal periods. So it's not about that particular accused person or now convicted person. But the RCMP have assured me that they use a difficult circumstance like that to review their own procedures. And I've had a conversation as recently as last weekend with Commissioner Duhem, and I have total confidence that the RCMP is very much on top of what needs to be done to minimize the risk of these obviously very serious incidents.
Minister, and on the suicide, just to get a bit more specific on the internet being a difficult place to legislate, can you tell us a bit more about what specifically makes it hard? Is it just the global nature of the internet? What is the challenge here?
Well, I obviously, in the aftermath of a tragedy like this young boy taking his own life, want to be careful to respect the family and the difficult moment that this is for all Canadians to understand that something this tragic can happen. My colleague, the Minister of Justice, has done the difficult work of getting legislation ready to improve protections and ensure that we have the best level of online safety possible, and he'll have a lot to say about that when the legislation is introduced.
But just in the absence of Mr. Varania not being here today, like, is it just some of that global nature of the internet where, yes, we can have Canadian laws, but someone like extorting or harassing someone online, they could be often like anywhere in the world.
Well, that's obviously a challenge. Again, I'm not an internet legislative expert, but it is a global challenge, and other countries, allies, partners of Canada, are also looking at what they can do in their own legislative frameworks to ensure the maximum protection for vulnerable people. And imagine the tragedy of a 12-year-old boy in Western Canada and British Columbia taking his own life because he's subject to some online sextortion case. So I think we can be inspired by what other jurisdictions have done, but we have our own unique legal system in Canada, and my colleague, the Minister of Justice, I think is in the best position to answer those particular questions, and I know he's made significant progress on this, and I look forward to him introducing legislation.
If I might just ask you about one more topic, sir. On the House, we've been talking a lot about the toxic drug crisis, and we've heard from both the RCMP and the CBSA.
CBSA president, I think, was...
We didn't actually manage to get somebody quite that high ranking, but we were talking about the fact that Canada is exporting fentanyl, which I think would shock a lot of Canadians. What can you say about what the government is doing to try to address the toxic drug crisis at the borders in particular?
And you're right, it is an alarming increase both in the production domestically of fentanyl, and we see the consequences in every part of the country, the tragic consequences. The RCMP have spoken to me often about the challenge of the legality of some of the precursor drugs that can be, in many cases, lawfully imported into Canada. The Commissioner has talked to me about a number of ways that we could legislate perhaps some of the chemicals that go into these very dangerous and illegally made drugs. And the Canadian Border Services Agency has a lot of work to do. It has a lot of work to do around the potential exporting of these illegal substances and importing some of the precursor chemicals. Years ago, everybody thought that the fentanyl itself was made in some other country. In many cases, people focused on China, and it was imported into Canada. The RCMP tell me that that's also still true. That's also a challenge. But it's even more complicated and worrisome when that challenge is being replaced by our own domestic production of these drugs. So a lot of it has to do with local police, municipal police, provincial police in Ontario and Quebec. But the RCMP and the CBSA have a role to play both in dismantling the production domestically and the CBSA in doing everything it can, including with new technologies. They've talked to me about potential new investments in technologies that could better detect the potential exports. So I'm obviously doing everything I can to ensure that they have the necessary resources to bring every bit of pressure to bear. The idea that Canada would export fentanyl is obviously completely unacceptable. We need to deal with our own domestic production, but we shouldn't pass that production on to other countries. We should stop other countries from importing it into Canada, and we should limit the domestic production to the lawful medical use of fentanyl in Canadian hospitals. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to get your response to Premier Smith from yesterday, the decision to invoke the Sovereignty Act for the clean electricity regulations.
So I'll say today what I said about the Sovereignty Act before. It's a dubious piece of legislation. It actually sets up a fight that doesn't need to be there. What the Premier has triggered with the Sovereignty Act is to try to delay regulations that wouldn't come into place till 2035 anyway. It's a distraction from the fact that she put a pause on renewables. She's trying to take Albertans out of CPP. I think this is actually a bigger fight in her own cabinet. I think this goes right to the roots of Take Back Alberta and who's actually in charge of the Alberta government. And so if you're actually trying to build a province, get renewables, build the energy grid, the electricity grid, make sure we have better housing, that our cities are safe and growing. You don't pick this kind of fight with the federal government. The working table remains in place. We're going through all these issues together. So you heard how she reported to one of your colleagues yesterday. The act is just there because it gets more media attention. So that's not what Albertans are asking for. When we get elected, they ask us to get this work done together, collaboratively, and if she wants to work with us, she can pick up the phone and call.
Do you think there are legitimate concerns about the way the clean electricity regulations would impact Alberta's market? Alberta doesn't have the hydro or the nuclear, but a lot of provinces do. This will be a bigger transition for Alberta.
Look, when I met with the Premier 3 weeks ago, we raised the issue of nuclear power, and we raised the fact that our government has put $75 million into the feasibility study and more in Saskatchewan to get the first SMR there as part of BHP Billiton's doubling of their mine, and she was very interested in working with the federal government. But the regulatory framework in Alberta actually doesn't exist yet to do nuclear in a serious way. So those regulations have to change and evolve, or maybe they have to borrow them from another jurisdiction. But we're all in, ready to work with Alberta on nuclear. And take a look at Grand Prairie. The mayor met with me and has set aside 1,200 acres outside of Grand Prairie so they could be the first site for SMR. So we're there, we're ready to go. I think invoking the Sovereignty Act is a distraction from the really good work that's taking place at the working table where her officials and our officials are working through all these issues.
Okay, thanks, Randy.
Thanks, everyone.
Is there any further movement? So expect an announcement before the deadline.
Yes, I did indeed speak about this morning, so briefly, we're still listening carefully to the different points of view on the matter, and we will take a decision in due course.
Is it, in your view, the best bet for the government to go with a sole source contract on this, given what we know about NATO's new procurement?
So again, I'll be continuing to listen to, and not only myself, we are obviously several ministers listening carefully and appreciating all the input we are receiving. It's important that people from all sorts of different perspectives tell us what they believe to be the best option, and once that is done, we'll be able to take a decision, and that will be done in due course.
Let me ask you this then. There's a deadline of November 30th in order with the U.S. government. This deal with the U.S. government expires on November 30th. Have you asked them for an extension to that deadline?
Again, there's not more I can add at this time. It's all a matter of being very mindful of the different points of view that are being expressed and taking the right decision at the right time.
But with the Americans, have you asked for an extension?
We are always encouraging resources and our counterparts to work with us to see what resources are needed to augment their work. But I can say for myself, Toronto Police Services has been phenomenal in the work that they've been doing. I'm very encouraged by it, and we just have to continue supporting doing the right investigations of what are hateful acts and our violence.
Does the online harms bill have to be sped up to deal with some of this?
I think the online harms bill is moving along as it should, and we continue to engage with stakeholders on it to make sure that we put in place legislation that has the teeth that it needs to address the issue.
I think you were asked about this morning too, but the 12-year-old in British Columbia, it is absolutely heartbreaking. What can be done to try and prevent that kind of event?
So the story this morning out of Prince George is absolutely tragic. We should never hear stories of 12-year-olds who succumb to suicide. That being said, certainly this is why Kids Help Phone, which is something we've supported as a federal government, is so critical. They're actually part of our network for the 988, which is launching this week. We want to make sure that we have supports in place for everyone, no matter how old they are, where they live throughout the country, that they can get immediate support in a crisis situation like this young man was in. Can we do more? Absolutely. This is why the 988 is so important. This is why connecting a network from coast to coast to coast will matter, so that people are getting the help they need, how they need it, including on text, including 24-hour service on this week in official languages, and also with our Indigenous programs as well. You're welcome. Thank you.
The stories yesterday came out about the former head of the Safety Commission had spent $288,000 in travel over a year and a half. This at the same time as you issued a directive saying don't do that. Do you have thoughts on that, and if the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commissioner should explain that more?
To be clear, the goal of the spending review that we are launching and
we're actually in progress ensuring that we deliver on is to make sure we're refocusing unnecessary spending, such as on executive travel, such as on outsourcing, towards the priorities that matter to Canadians: affordability, affordable housing, reconciliation, the green economy. And so while I do not have a comment on that specific case, I will say that it is extremely important for all of us to be very judicious about the choices we are making relating to travel, among other things.
Is the Treasury Board tonight going to make a decision about the sole source contract with Boeing?
I'm actually very surprised that you are asking me that question. As you must be aware, all deliberations of Cabinet and Cabinet committees are confidential, and
until they're not.
When there is an announcement to make, I'm sure you will be aware of that. There is a need for us to continue to ensure that all deliberations of Cabinet and Cabinet committees are confidential, and I implore everyone to ensure that that occurs.
Minister, do you believe that Boeing, a sole source contract with Boeing for these aircraft is a good idea for the government?
All government deliberations are confidential,
No more questions,
and I have no comment on that issue.
No more questions,
Thank you.
Can I ask you about the deal that the government has apparently signed with Boeing? Have you further sent this deal yet?
There's no decision that has been taken yet.
How long do you expect it will take? You have it
Take in due course, but there's no that decision in due course. No decision has been taken.
Has Stellantis agreed to a meeting
Sorry,
date?
I could not.
Has Stellantis agreed to a meeting date with yourself and the
I have to, we're going to get there. It's just a matter of scheduling now because, you know, as you know, today I'm on my way to Edmonton, and tomorrow, not tomorrow, but next week we're at COP. So we just need to organize scheduling to make sure that we can meet. But we have all intentions, and I wrote again this morning to the COO of Stellantis in the United States to raise this issue again, and saying that we need all of us to maximize opportunities for Canadians.
Are they not being responsive enough to concerns around this? It seems like everyone has a hard time getting in touch with them.
Well, not personally, because I know all of them, so I don't have problems reaching out to anyone because they respond to the Minister of Industry of Canada.
It's more than responding because we're taking a long time to figure out what's the plan with all of these workers. The number's been bouncing around a lot over the past
There's been a lot of numbers, a lot of misinformation. That's why I stick to the numbers. The company is investing $3.4 billion of their money to build the plant in Canada. They have said that there will be 2,500 workers at the plant to operate the plant for decades to come, and up to 2,300 jobs for the construction of the plant. Now, what we're talking about is how do you maximize opportunities for building trades? And like I said, this is not unique to Canada. This is, transfer of knowledge. When you start a new industry, it's not unique to us. It's the same thing in the United States, same thing in Europe. So what we're saying is that now what we need to do is to make sure that we sit down with them and maximize opportunities. I hear very much loud and clear the message of the building trades. We want to maximize opportunities for them, but we should not lose sight that this is a transformational investment for Windsor, for Canada, for Ontario, for decades to come. So we're going to do what's right for all our workers, and also, but we need not to lose sight of celebrating one of the largest investment in our country.
Yeah, we still don't have a clear picture of why they need 900 workers. Like, yes, everyone agrees, even the union agrees, we need workers to come in, show us how do we work with this proprietary technology, but it seems like no one has gotten a straight answer from Stellantis on why 900.
I suspect it's because the size of these, gigafactories is those are huge factory, and in order to make that analysis very precisely, you would need to look at the type of equipment, where it's coming from, what's the warranty with respect to that equipment. So that's why I say, for me, I stick to the facts. I stick to the facts that I know and the numbers that I know, and those that I know is the one that I stated to you. On the other end, that being said, our job and all of us is to maximize opportunities for Canadians, and they understand that.
Is that like a transparency concern? Is that like a transparency concern that, like, obviously Stellantis knows why they want upwards of 900 workers to come in, but no one else has been shared that info yet? Like,
well, I would say it's, I would say probably at this point of time, like you said, many people have been floating all sorts of numbers around.
Stellantis said 900.
Yeah, but again, you have to look down as to what is the equipment, how many workers you need, for how long, and that's, my point. Beyond that is to maximize opportunities for Canadians. We have amazing workers in the country. This is going to be an investment that's going to be transformational, not only for Windsor, but the whole industry. Everyone understands that when you bring a new technology, we were not manufacturing batteries in North America before. And now we're going to do that. We're going to lead. So we need the transfer of technology, know-how, and expertise. That's what this is about. And like I said, I want to make sure that we maximize opportunities for Canadians.
You're headed to Edmonton. Do you have any message for the Alberta government, given the
Well,
Sovereignty Act invocation?
I'll see them tomorrow. You watch. We're going to be together. Merci tout le monde. Attendez.
I wanted to ask you about nicotine pouches. First of all, will you commit to either putting a temporary ban or classifying it as a prescription, which is something that the national health groups are calling on, until provincial legislation can be brought in to ensure that this is not being sold to minors?
Well, first of all, I'm appalled by the actions of the tobacco industry. Yet again, they've tried to seek a loophole to find a new way to peddle nicotine, and it is wholly unacceptable. This space was used by companies for cessation, and the regulations that exist allowed people to use products for cessation purposes. And it's very clear, in my view, that there are very serious questions about what the tobacco industry is doing here and what their intention is. And it would seem that their intention is to addict new young people to nicotine, which is disgusting. And I think that we have to take this seriously. We're reviewing internally how we can yet again close these loopholes. And this is not the first time the nicotine industry, or the tobacco industry has done this, where they have looked for loopholes, they've looked for opportunities to target new consumers, to addict them to these products, when they know the injurious effect it has. And it's particularly egregious that they would target young people with flavors that are, in my opinion, looking at it, how else do you explain what these flavors are for than to addict new young people to this product, which is incredibly injurious to their health. So I'm mad, and I think it's wholly inappropriate. And yes, we're going to look, and I'm frustrated that once again we have to go back and adjust our regulations because the tobacco industry has found some Machiavellian, clever way to skirt regulations and try to addict new people.
So will you look at doing what these health groups are suggesting, which they say could be done quickly, either make it a prescription or ban its sale temporarily while the provinces catch up with their legislation?
Yeah, we're looking at what actions we can take and to take those actions quickly. We want to shut down this loophole. We want to make sure that there's still products that are there for legitimate cessation purposes to help people who are addicted to nicotine and using nicotine products to be able to get off of it. So legitimate cessation, we want to be able to continue, but allowing this as a new avenue to addict new people to nicotine is unacceptable.
How quickly can you move on this?
Well, as quickly as possible. I hope you can hear from my comments that I'm incredibly motivated to make sure that we don't allow this to open a new frontier that we have to shut down again. When I was at Heart and Stroke and I was talking about vaping in the early days, I was deeply concerned then about vaping being a totally new mechanism to addict new people to nicotine and create habits for people who weren't on cigarettes and to use space that wasn't for cessation. And I am deeply concerned about any effort that the tobacco companies try to use, and if they could hear me, we will find you. Whatever loophole you find, we will shut down. Stop it. Stop targeting our kids. Stop going after them with such a deadly product. Help us get people off this, and frankly, hopefully they can get on to some other business, because tobacco is the only product, if you take as directed, that will kill you.
How did this get through? The tobacco company says it was almost a 2-year approval process through Health Canada So how is this, if you feel so strongly about this, how was this approved by Health Canada?
Because again, understand that the basis on which the understanding was like other products in this category using this provision, that it was for the purposes of cessation. It wasn't until they got out into the market, we saw their marketing, we saw how they were targeting, that now, again, all appearances seem to be that they're not going, this is not cessation, this is trying to create a new product line and addict new people.
So how did that get past Health Canada when we know what happened with vaping, and the tobacco company used a very similar method to get that through onto shelves?
Look, I in a very Machiavellian way, in a very dark way that unfortunately we have to acknowledge the cleverness of the tobacco companies, and this isn't the first time that they've found a way to evade regulations and the spirit and the intent of those regulations. They know the spirit and intention of the regulations is that the only way these provisions are to be used is to help people get off of nicotine and help people who are addicted to get to a path where they're no longer addicted, right? And they know that's what the spirit is. They know what this is about. So the fact that they would seek out an opportunity to pervert that so that they could make profit going after particularly young people with a product that is so injurious to their health is reprehensible. And yes, absolutely, we have to review our processes. We paint in different colors. We're trying to protect people's health. So we don't always think about the dark and nefarious ways that companies can go after people's health to try to make profit.
But should Health Canada, should your ministry not have looked at this happening? This was 2 years, and Health Canada still allowed it to go through. So
well, yeah, no, I think we're going to have to review our processes. I don't want anything to go out there that is going to target new users, and particularly young people. So we're going to have to go and take a really rigorous look at our processes. But let's be honest, this space existed and has existed for legitimate cessation purposes for a long time. The intent, the way that this was presented is that it was for the purposes of cessation. In their marketing and their approach, it exists in a completely different way. We were duped. Unfortunately, sometimes you get duped. In my opinion, the intention of the tobacco industry was to do what they're doing, which it appears to be targeting young people and going after entirely new cohorts of people to make revenue off of the illness of people, which is disgusting. And I wish that that they could hear loud and clear, and clearly we're going to have to show them that we will allow no new frontiers in this war, that we have to do everything in our power to get people off of nicotine, to get people off of cigarettes. It's the #1 cause of preventable death in this country. We've seen too many people, too many lives lost, too many families devastated by this product, and we've got to find a way to help get people off it.
I've been speaking with provinces and territories. Some of them say they weren't consulted. They're extremely concerned that Health Canada and the federal government allowed this product to come onto the market. Did you consult with the provinces? Did you give them a heads up that they would maybe need to bring in regulations? Because so many of these regulations right now deal with tobacco or vaping, which these pouches are exempt from, essentially.
Well, I think, again, the intention here was cessation. And so if the product had been used as it was described, and for purposes of cessation, then I think everybody would be happy, and we wouldn't be in this situation. But the true intent appears to have been concealed. They appear to have led with one intention, which was cessation and helping people get off of nicotine, and instead done something completely different. Obviously, if we knew their intention, we would have never allowed them. So, the consultations that go on with provinces all the time, they're deeply supportive of our cessation efforts. They're deeply supportive of trying to get people off of tobacco. Obviously, neither us nor them would be in favor of anything that didn't do that. But as I said, and you asked the question, it's a fair question. Every time the tobacco industry dupes us, every time they, with their billions of dollars and all of their resources globally, try to find a way to addict new young people and prove that they're an industry that simply doesn't seem to care about people's health and puts their profit ahead of people's lives, every time they do that, then we have to rearm ourselves, reorganize, and stop them from doing this. And I would simply say, each time they show their intention and they do things like this, hopefully people can see the industry that we're dealing with. Tobacco and the strategies that they've used to addict people, the strategies that they have used globally, we need to denormalize this industry because the practices they have used are not only injurious to health, but frankly dark.
I want to push back on what you say about being duped, because these products have been available in the United States for some time. They're in Europe so much that some countries are banning them already. So how would you be duped when this was already showing an issue in other parts of the world?
Well, I take responsibility for that. I take responsibility for that. You know, in my time as health minister, you know, I have conversations with my staff. You know, I was part of the Ontario campaign for action against tobacco. I was head of the heart and stroke in Ontario. I care deeply and personally about these issues, and the fact that we could have allowed this to get across the line and not seen this eventuality and not seen what they do, what they were going to do. I'm deeply apologetic for. I do not want this out in the world, and we're going to do everything we can to remediate it.
You said quickly. Are you hoping weeks, months? These groups say like this needs to happen very fast.
No, I understand as absolutely as fast as possible, and we're working with our officials, a full court press, to make sure this loophole is closed.
Thanks for stopping and taking my question.
Thanks so much.